We're now just one day out from a full Sunday slate for Week 4 fantasy football to begin on, and there are tons of running back injuries and developments as a whole. And I do this every Saturday. We're going through every single matchup to find the must-start and must-sit running backs for Week 4 fantasy football. And we just hit 5,000 subscribers yesterday, and I wanted to say thank you guys for all the support that you guys give every single day. And we're going to be giving away more FFN White Hats this week. So go down there in the comments and give me your boldest take for Week 4 fantasy football for a chance to randomly be selected to win this hat. We'll be giving away 5 hats this week for 5,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get to 6,000 subscribers next. So please make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support for the channel. So let's go ahead and just start diving through these matchups. So obviously no bye weeks yet until next week, so we're getting another full slate of games this weekend. So our first matchup is going to be the Falcons at the Jaguars, and what you'll notice in these charts, as always, is that in my start and flex territory, these guys are ranked in order with my rankings for the particular week. So obviously Bijan Robinson and Travis Etienne are both must-start guys. Bijan Robinson, bad week last week, but the previous 2 weeks, he's been super efficient and his workload continues to increase here. Bijan Robinson's going to be just fine. You're never going to sit Bijan Robinson unless he's injured. Travis Etienne, I feel the exact same way. He's been excellent so far. He's really been one of the lone bright spots on the Jaguars offense. He's looked great in fantasy football. He's usually averaging around 20 touches per game. And against a Falcons defense that is not as good as I once thought they were this year, I think they're going to be able to take advantage of this matchup with Travis Etienne specifically. And I think that Tyler Algier is still in flex territory, although I do acknowledge that he's going lower down the flex territory. He's basically at my lower tier flex options at this point. Last week was the first week that he was under 10 carries, and I think a lot of it did have to do with game script. They were down early, and then they stayed down last week. And Tyler Algier just wasn't important enough in the offense last week. But I do think that Tyler Algier is a descending asset in fantasy football, not an ascending asset. And then we could go ahead and sit Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby, to me, just not getting enough there. The guy everybody was hyped about, yeah, he's had a couple touches over the past several weeks. It's not there right now for Tank Bigsby. Moving on to the next matchup, we've got the Rams taking on the Colts in Indianapolis this week. So obviously you're going to continue to start Kyren Williams. It was a bad week last week, but Kyren Williams was the running back 2 heading into week 3. So you continue just ride it out with him. He's really important to this offense. They're not using other running backs in the system right now. Kyren Williams is the guy, but he is inefficient. And what I will say is I do believe that you should be looking to trade high. Send him off on the high. That's what I believe you should be doing. But if you have him on your team, I think he's still a must-start guy. And honestly, I wrestled with Zach Moss this week. Like, I originally had Zach Moss in flex territory, but I've evaluated Zach Moss a lot with the Colts over the past several weeks. I love this Colts offense so much that I think that anybody who plays running back is going to be good for them. And obviously, there's no Jonathan Taylor still this week, and maybe next week either. Who knows how that whole thing is going to play out. But this week, Zach Moss is coming off 2 straight good games now in fantasy football. And last week, it was also against a Ravens defense that is good at stopping the run. So this week, against the Rams defense that's starting to show some cracks, I'll take Zach Moss in this matchup. He's more of a lower tier starter for me, but I do believe that he does belong in start territory right now. Flex territory, there's nobody because there's really no other relevant running backs in either offense, and then you'll go ahead and you'll sit everybody else. Ravens at Browns is our next matchup here, and I've got nobody in start territory. I don't think that anybody is really starter worthy. Obviously, the Ravens running back group is a complete mess right now. You've got guys like Gus Edwards, who was in the concussion protocol earlier this week, but now he is out, so he is going to play. Justice Hill questionable, Kenyon Drake, Melvin Gordon, veteran running backs you don't want in fantasy football. Nobody's a must-start here on the Ravens, that's for sure. And I wrestled with Jerome Ford being in must-start territory, but I elected to go with him in flex territory because I do believe that this offense will struggle more this week against the Ravens than they did last week. So I think that this is a type of week for Jerome Ford where he's going to struggle. If you looked at what he did last week, he averaged less than 2 yards per carry. The only things that saved him were his 2 touchdowns that he got. And Good for him. He got the 2 touchdowns, and good for you as well. I'm sure you probably started him in a lot of leagues, but I do think it's important to note here that he is not exactly a super efficient guy. So he will have weeks where he does not get into the end zone and he will disappoint you. And I have a feeling this could be one of those weeks. Deshaun Watson also questionable in this matchup, so I don't know how likely this offense is going to be very explosive and very balanced. So just a thing to note here for Jerome Ford. And you go ahead, you sit Justice Hill, and if you have Kenyon Drake, if you have Melvin Gordon, don't worry about playing those guys. Honestly, this Ravens backfield is such a mess right now. There's a lot of things that need to be ironed out first. Vikings at Panthers is the next matchup here. And again, I don't think anybody's a must-start guy this week. I really don't. Miles Sanders is obviously a type of guy that most of the time you're probably going to start just because of volume alone. But there's a lot of things that are bad with Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders has not been efficient this year. And I don't think it's all on the fault of his. I think a lot of it has to do with a bad offensive line. And they have a very bad offensive line. Now, what he had his saving grace be last week was that he got 9 targets in this offense, and Andy Dalton, the quarterback who gave him all those targets, is starting again. So I do believe that he does have upside from a receiving perspective, but he's also injured. He's coming into the weekend questionable with a groin injury. Now, I haven't heard one way or the other. We're filming this early Saturday morning, trying to get this ready for you guys on Saturday morning. There's not a lot I've heard about Miles Sanders about one way or the other, whether he's leaning on playing or not. So we'll have to be cautious on this one, but I do think if he does play, he's a pretty solid flex option. Alexander Mattison is a mid to low tier flex option. Last week was the best week he's had in fantasy football terms all season long. But what I said earlier this week in my running back rankings video is that I think Alexander Madison's job is on notice. Head coach Kevin McConnell came out and said after that loss against the Chargers last week that players who are putting the ball on the ground may get benched here pretty soon. And Alexander Mattison has put the ball on the ground 4 times in 2 games. So that's very, very bad look for Alexander Mattison. I think he's still going to be the running back 1 this week, but I do think he's on a very, very short leash, and that makes me very uneasy to tell my audience that you could start him without question. Chuba Hubbard, you go ahead and sit him. Ty Chandler of the Vikings, very interesting to me this week. I don't think that he's going to get a ton of work this week, but I will say if you have a deeper bench, stash him, put him on your bench this week because there's a chance, like I said, that Alexander Mattison could lose his job. Bengals at Titans is the next matchup here, and we've got obviously the 2 main running backs. You'll continue to both start them. Joe Mixon is a guy that you could definitely feel confident starting in this week because for multiple reasons. The Bengals offense looked a little bit better last week. Joe Mixon had a good fantasy week last week. And really the main problem here is that Tennessee is a very good run-stopping team. That is their strength on defense. They can't defend the pass, but they can defend the run. So Joe Mixon, just from a matchup perspective, I understand being a little more nervous, but you don't sit a guy like Joe Mixon. His upside is too high, and he gets too much of the workload to ever sit Joe Mixon. And honestly, I still feel the same about Derrick Henry. Obviously, last week, the workload was bad, and it was not good. Like, he was not efficient. He's not been efficient all year, so if he doesn't have the workload, where's his upside, really? But think about what the game script was. The game script last week, they fell behind so early to the Cleveland Browns that they had to throw the ball to catch up. So Derrick Henry wasn't used as much in the passing game either. He's never been. So I do think that this week is different because I think they will make it a closer game versus the Bengals this week. And here's a fun fact. Mike Vrabel is one of the best coaches in the NFL when he is an underdog. And the Titans are home underdogs this week. Just saying, I do think they will keep this close, which will favor Derrick Henry. And then obviously, you're not going to flex anybody. I'm not ready to flex Tyjae Spears yet. I'd say Tyjae Spears, you give him a couple more weeks, see what his volume is. The reality is, as many snaps as he's getting in on, he's still not seeing a ton of volume. Derrick Henry still is handling the majority of the volume, so I would continue to just go ahead and sit Tyjae Spears, but I do acknowledge that he is a good stash. Buccaneers at Saints is the next matchup here, and I'll be honest here, I wrestled with starting Alvin Kamara a lot this time. And honestly, I'm not starting Alvin Kamara in any leagues that I have him in. I'm making other moves here. But I do acknowledge that in a lot of deeper leagues, and really not just in deep leagues, there's a lot of leagues that I would start Alvin Kamara in. If I didn't have other options, like a Zach Moss that I felt comfortable with, you know what I mean? Or a Kyron Williams that I felt comfortable with. Alvin Kamara would be on my bench most of the time, but if I didn't have those options, I would start Alvin Kamara. Because while I do think he will struggle in his first week back, there's no question that he will handle volume. The volume is going to be there for Alvin Kamara because number one, Kendre Miller, not an impressive rookie so far. And number two, Jamal Williams, he's on IR. So Alvin Kamara really has just like no competition right now for targets. Tony James is not going to do it. So Alvin Kamara definitely is going to be starter worthy just based on volume alone. And then flex territory, Rachaad White, I would consider him a medium end flex guy because Rachaad White has proved that to be more valuable and more higher upside than I thought. But the Saints defense is elite. This is not a matchup for Rachaad White to take advantage of here. And then, like I said, you're going to go ahead and you're going to sit Kendre Miller. Kendre Miller, there's a shot that he's a better player with Alvin Kamara to help. But right now, based on what we saw last week, got no interest in him. And then Sean Tucker, you continue to sit him. He just isn't involved enough right now. Dolphins at Bills, the fantasy football matchup of the week right here. You've got to start both guys. Raheem Mostert, you've got to start James Cook as well. Raheem Mostert is the running back one in fantasy football right now. Like, he's been just unbelievable. He's getting touchdowns galore in this ridiculously excellent, high-flying Miami Dolphins offense. You continue to play Raheem Mostert. There's no way you could sit him right now. He's so red hot. He's on the best offense in football. You can't sit Raheem Mostert. And I do think that this matchup here is a pretty decent struggle play, but I do think that Raheem Mostert is just such a clear start right here. James Cook as well. You continue to play James Cook. Listen, Buffalo is finally establishing a run game for the first time since Josh Allen has gotten there. And it's because of James Cook. Super efficient guy. Hasn't found the end zone yet, but that is going to come. And James Cook in this high-flying matchup, I want most pieces in this offense. And Devon Achane, I don't consider him a must-start guy because as I have said throughout the week, I want to see one more week of what his volume is going to be. Because last week he did get 20-plus touches, but they also won the game by 50 points, 70-20 against the Denver Broncos. So a lot of time that he got was in the third quarter to the fourth quarter when the game was already out of hand. I want to see what it's like in a more competitive game. But I do acknowledge that just in a high upside offense, a high octane offense like this, and obviously coming off a great week where he just scored 4 touchdowns, he's not going to just ride the bench the whole game, I don't think. So Devon Achane is a more higher end flex option this week to me. And then you go ahead and you sit Damian Harris. You got no business playing him. Broncos at Bears, maybe the biggest sleeper matchup of the week. Javonte Williams is going to be a must start here. Javonte Williams, as bad as the defense was last week, and as bad as the whole team really was, there's one thing for certain in this offense, and that is the fact that Javonte Williams is the starting running back, and it's not close. Javonte Williams is handling the majority of the workload, and Samaje Perine's touches continue to decrease week by week. Javonte Williams is always going to be a solid option here, especially against a horrendous Bears defense. Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, they're really both in the same range for me. Because honestly, Roschon Johnson is starting to catch up with Khalil Herbert as far as their fantasy values go. Roschon Johnson has looked like the better running back through 3 weeks in Chicago. Khalil Herbert, I still do have some faith in him, but as a whole, I've lost all faith in the Bears offense entirely. So I don't think either of them are must start. I do think they're both interesting flex options. I'm starting to really reconsider if I prefer Roschon Johnson or not though. And then you go ahead, you sit Samaje Perine, no question here. Moving on to our next matchup, we've got the Commanders at the Eagles this week. So you're going to continue to start DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift at this point is really a must-start, no-brainer to me. I mean, listen, I was worried last week coming into the week about what the volume was going to break down with the return of Kenneth Gainwell. And while it was very even, Kenneth Gainwell had 14 carries, DeAndre Swift had 16 carries. While it was even, there was a clear, better running back on that field, and that was DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is basically the perfect running back in this offense. Super efficient guy, very, very good vision, can easily find the holes to break off massive runs. DeAndre Swift is such a great running back in this offense. I am so in on starting him right now. And then you can flex Kenneth Gainwell. I do think you can flex Kenneth Gainwell, but he's more of a lower tier option because he will get volume, it seems, but I don't think his upside is nearly as high. But we always know that he's always a threat to get in the end zone. The Eagles like to use him down to the goal line sometimes. Brian Robinson is going to be a higher end flex option while acknowledging, just based on volume, that he's going to be a good play. This matchup is not good. The Eagles defense, and specifically the front seven, is probably the best in the league. So I don't think that Brian Robinson is a must-lock start this week. Volume alone, there's definitely going to be merit in starting him, and I would consider starting him in a lot of situations, but this matchup is not good right now. Antonio Gibson, I mean, if you have him on your roster at this point, I think he's dead weight. I think you could drop him now. Steelers at Texans is the next matchup, and I don't consider anybody a must-start in this game. I don't. I mean, both running backs have been very, very bad in fantasy football this year, and I don't think it's getting better right now for either of them. I will acknowledge that I think Dameon Pierce is in a different tier than Najee Harris as far as starting options this week, and I've got Dameon Pierce in like the upper middle tier of flex options this week. Because listen, as bad as and as inefficient as Dameon Pierce has been this year, the Steelers defense is usually the cure for running backs. They are awful, awful, awful at defending the run. So I do think that Dameon Pierce does have some upside this week, but I don't think that he's going to be a player that's going to be very much more efficient every single week. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, they're very close to me as far as being able to flex them. Now, Najee Harris did handle 19 carries last week, which clearly outsnapped Jalen Warren last week. But on a week-to-week basis, I do think that a lot of that stuff can change. So I do think that they're very close to being in the lower middle tier for me as far as starters go, as far as flex options go this week. Devin Singletary, you go ahead and you sit him. Raiders at Chargers, the next matchup here. We're going to go ahead and keep starting Josh Jacobs, guys. Josh Jacobs is just in a situation where he's so clearly the lead back. And I think I have to think at some point here, Josh Jacobs will recover. I don't know how else to put this one. I just think he's going to recover. And the reality with it is that if he doesn't recover this week and have a breakout week, we're going to have serious problems with Josh Jacobs. We're taking on a Chargers defense this week that is absolutely horrendous at everything. They can't stop anything. So I think that Josh Jacobs has to go off, especially with a potentially injured and sidelined Jimmy Garoppolo where they might have to use a backup quarterback. He better produce this week. We're going to have serious problems if he doesn't, so I'll put my money on the side of him producing this week. Joshua Kelly is going to be in flex territory. If you haven't heard the news, Austin Eckler is doubtful for this game, so he's likely not going to be going. As I predicted earlier in the week, they're going to wait until the bye week for them to get him back out there. So Joshua Kelly is going to continue to be flexible, especially in this type of matchup against the Raiders. So I would say he's more of a higher to mid-end flex option right here. You don't consider starting anybody else in this matchup. Cardinals at 49ers, you obviously continue to start Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, like anyone's ever going to sit Christian McCaffrey. He's been so amazing this year, so excellent at every single thing, hasn't dropped off at all, and Kyle Shanahan has an addiction to using Christian McCaffrey. He can't help himself. But I do think that there is worth noting here that Kyle Shanahan has acknowledged he needs to lighten McCaffrey's workload and get him off the field. So I have been stashing Elijah Mitchell in a lot of different leagues this week, and if he's on your waiver wire, I would acknowledge stashing him is not a bad idea, not just from a volume perspective, but Christian McCaffrey is at an age where he might, he has an injury history, so I think it's good insurance move right here. Although obviously Christian McCaffrey's healthy right now, you start him. There's no question. James Conner is a upper tier flex option because, listen, this matchup is bad. This matchup against the 49ers, nobody needs to tell you that this matchup sucks. But also, James Conner's been really good in fantasy this year. He's a top 10 fantasy football running back. I mean, that's the reality here with James Conner. So just based on performance alone and the Cardinals being a better team than we once thought, James Conner has to be in a decent flex category, but the matchup's not good here. And I can't put him inside start territory with this kind of a matchup where I do think the Cardinals will finally lose a game pretty handedly this year. Elijah Mitchell, like I said, sit him this week. but stash him. If he's on your waiver wire, and especially if you have Christian McCaffrey, I would go out of my way to stash him. Patriots at Cowboys here. Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, you play them both. Tony Pollard had a down game last week for his standards, but he was still very good in fantasy football. You never sit Tony Pollard. I don't care what the week is. But what I will say, and what I have said all week with this matchup specifically with Tony Pollard, is I do think, with Belichick being known for taking out your number one option, I do think that he views Tony Pollard as that number one option. So I do think that he will sell out to stop Tony Pollard and make Dak throw. But nonetheless, Tony Pollard has been so great in fantasy this year, there's no way you're benching him. Ramondre Stevenson, you continue to play him. I understand he's been a little bit underwhelming for sure, but just based on volume, he's got to be in your starting lineup. This guy has been very, very good as far as catching the ball out of the backfield still. While he did get less targets last week, I still think that Mac Jones is going to have to check the ball, especially in a game like this where Micah Parsons is going to be absolutely after him. Mac Jones is going to have to get the ball out of his hands quickly. Nobody's a flex territory guy for me. You sit guys like Ezekiel Elliott and the rest of them. Chiefs at Jets on Sunday night. What a Sunday night game, by the way. The Chiefs are going to absolutely spank the Jets this weekend. Isaiah Pacheco, definitely a must-start guy for me. Definitely is going to get the most of the volume in the backfield. They're going to crush the Jets. The game script is going to go run heavy as soon as they start crushing the Jets. Isaiah Pacheco last week was good in a blowout game. I expect the same thing this week in a blowout game. Breece Hall, Jerick McKinnon, they're both lower tier flex options. And I hate to say it, but Breece Hall is just in a really bad situation. The team is so one-dimensional with Zach Wilson, they can't get anything going. Every team knows we sell out to stop Breece Hall, and we have stopped the Jets' offense effectively. Jerick McKinnon is right there in the same tier because you never know when he's going to have a big game. But again, that's the thing about getting him in leagues like Best Ball. But obviously, you're talking about redraft and must-start and sit videos. Jerick McKinnon's always a good flex option if you want to make some upside plays and if you're in a really deep league and you need to take a deeper shot. Jerick McKinnon had 2 touchdowns last week. There's a chance he could do it again. Always, for sure. Sit Dalvin Cook, sit Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would personally drop both of them. I've got no use for either of them. Seahawks at Giants on the Monday night game. Last matchup of the week. We've got Kenneth Walker, clear must start. Top 3 running back in fantasy football right now. Why would you ever sit him? I mean, there's literally no reason to sit Kenneth Walker, especially against the Giants defense that is absolutely horrendous, possibly the worst in the entire league. Saquon Barkley, if he plays, you play him for sure. I'm filming this, like I said earlier, Saturday morning. What I have seen is that the Giants like the direction that he is heading in, while also acknowledging that he may not play this week. And listen, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. But if he does play, you obviously start him against the Seahawks defense. And Matt Breida obviously will be in flex territory if Saquon Barkley does not play. And honestly, the new guy here making his debut in the flex territory, I think you can flex Zach Charbonnet in deeper leagues, or if you just want to take a shot and you have to make some moves because of injuries here. Zach Charbonnet has been getting more and more involved by the weeks. He's increasing his workload, and I do believe that at some point, he will score a touchdown or two. Zach Charbonnet is looking like a good player in this league. So I do think this is the first week I'd say Zach Charbonnet is flexible. And if you have a deep league and you want to take the shot, I would not blame you. But we'll go ahead and we'll sit everybody else in this matchup. So let me know what matchup questions you need answered before week 4 fantasy football, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible. And we've got our must start and sit wide receiver video coming out later this afternoon. So make sure to tune in and check out that video when it comes out, and I'll see y'all then.